Standing committee reports. Or reports from the House. What do we have?
February 26, 2024. Mr. President, Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred House Bill 81 engrossed. Public Officer Training Amendments. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. No, Senator Case. Senator Landon, Chairman. February 26, 2024, Mr. President, Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred House Bill 15, Health Insurance Reimbursement of Overpayments. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. February 26, 2024, Mr. President, Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred House Bill 25, Medicaid Third-Party Payer Conditions. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. February 26, 2024, Mr. President, Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred House Bill 66 engrossed, Firefighter Cancer Screening Benefits. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. House bills on first reading. House Bill 29, first reading of the House bill.
House Bill 29 engrossed, Cold Case Database and Investigation, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee. Passed the House, ayes 53, noes 9.
House Bill 29 is assigned to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. House Bill 31, introduction.
House Bill 31 engrossed, Peace Officers, Records, and Reporting, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee. Passed the House, ayes 62.
House Bill 31 is assigned to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. House Bill 77, introduction.
House Bill 77 engrossed, Simple Assault Menacing, sponsored by Representative Washut. Passed the House, ayes 35, noes 27.
House Bill 77 is assigned to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. House Bill 74, introduction.
House Bill 74, Public Health Nursing Budget Request, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee. Passed the House, ayes 48, noes 14.
House Bill 74 is assigned to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. House Bill 197, introduction.
House Bill 197 engrossed, Sales Tax Administration Revisions, sponsored by Representatives Harshman. Passed the House, ayes 62.
House Bill 197 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. House Bill 67, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 67 engrossed, Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Fund Administration 2, sponsored by Representative Newsom. Passed the House, ayes 48, noes 14.
House Bill 67 is assigned to Committee Number 6, Travel. House Bill 148, introduction of the House bill.
House Bill 148 engrossed, Regulation of Surgical Abortions, sponsored by Representative Lawley. Passed the House, ayes 53, noes 9.
House Bill 148 is assigned to Committee Number 10, Labor. Bills on second reading. That's a short stack. Senate File 128, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 128, Approval of Charter School.
Senate File 128 having been heard 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be heard a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 130, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 130, the Equality State, Not Equity State Act.
Senate File 130 have been read two separate times. Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 131, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 131, Regulatory Reduction Task Force 2.
Senate File 131 have been read two separate times. Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 132, second reading bill.
Senate File 132, American Rescue Plan Act Appropriations Amendments 4.
There is an amendment. Can we have the amendment read in, please?
Senate File 132, second reading amendment number 1, page 28, lines 1 through 19, in.
Senator Dockstader.
Mr. President, I'd ask this amendment be laid back.
Withdrawn or laid back?
Withdrawn, excuse me.
Without objection, Senate. Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 132 has been withdrawn. We have a second amendment. We have it read in, please.
Senate File 132, second reading amendment number 2, page 31, line 17, before.
Senator Kolb.
I'd request this second reading amendment be laid back.
Withdrawn.
Withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. President.
Without objection, second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 132 has been withdrawn. We are back on the bill. Senate File 132 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business.
Mr. President, I move the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
Heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion is passed. Senator Anderson. So it says on my sheet.
Well, put the microphone on for crying out loud. The Committee of the Whole will please come to order. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 8. The reading clerk will please read the bill.
House Bill 8, Commercial Driver's License Hazardous Materials Endorsement, sponsored by the Transportation Committee, an act relating to motor vehicles.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure? Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, we do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 8. And to explain the bill, I refer to my colleague from Albany County.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this is a very simple bill. It's regarding adding an endorsement to the commercial driver's license to be able to handle hazardous material. And so if you look at the bill, really, the only change is from our current statutes. On page 2, line 14 and 15 and 16, it says that the operation of a vehicle transporting hazardous materials is approved, provided that the licensed driver has attained the age of 18 years. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make everyone aware of what our current regulation says. I'll read it very quickly. CDL, commercial driver's license, applicant who is applying for hazardous materials endorsement shall pass all required knowledge tests and comply with the federal, basically, regulations. If the applicant is at least 18 years old, but not yet 21 years old, the commercial driver's license shall have the interstate OK restriction, the K restriction imposed. So basically what we're changing, our agency said there's no need to keep that requirement in there. They've had no problems with drivers at least 18 years of age transporting hazardous material. So was the recommendation of the agency. We changed the regulation and eliminate the 18 to 21 year exemption and just go directly to 18 years. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what we approved in committee, and I'll stand for any questions.
Question on House Bill 8? Questions? Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator Boner's motion to adopt the Standing Committee of the Whole, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. No, there wasn't an amendment. No amendment. House Bill 8 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 10. Will the reading clerk please read it in?
House Bill 10, Grace Period State Land Lease Renewal, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee, an act relating to state lands.
House Bill 10. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 10 do pass. And for an explanation of the bill, I call from our good senator from Natrona County.
Senator Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just adding a section to 365104. Essentially what it doesn't get much easier than this. It's to grant the state land leases additional time to renew their leases. And it's just one sentence, section C, for good cause and at the written request of the current lessee, the director shall grant a current lessee 30 additional days past the expiration date of their existing lease to submit an application to renew their lease. That's all there is to the bill. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman.
Questions on the bill, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little more discussion. I'm wondering what the problem was that prompted your committee to look at this, and just want to make sure that that's just some discussion on why you landed on those certain timeframes, all of that. I'm just not keeping up. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, our family ranching operation I participate in has significant state leases, and I would declare a conflict on this bill.
Other questions? Senator Driscoll.
Conflict as well, thank you.
2 conflicts. Any other questions or admissions? Admissions of guilt? Senator Senator Barlow, before Senator Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No admission of guilt here, but I did just want to clarify a little bit of our interim work. As you know, we did a lot of revisions in state lands and investments last year and under the previous chairman, and they did a lot of good work. However, several situations have happened, family illnesses, heart attacks, just different things, and there was no flexibility within the rules for the director to have any kind of wiggle room to deal with extenuating circumstances. This is an attempt just to give a little bit of flexibility when those unforeseen circumstances happen, and there needs to be an adjustment that there's an ability to do that to accommodate our leaseholders and to make sure that payments are taken care of and leases aren't just revoked for no good reason. So that's the impetus, and the committee worked on it for a couple of different interim sessions, and we think it came out well, and we hope you'll support it.
You're ready. I think you're ready for the question. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole House Bill number 10, please say aye. All opposed, no. That House bill has passed. House Bill 10 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for your consideration is House Bill 16. Will please read the bill.
House Bill 16, Sutton State Archaeological Site Legal Description, sponsored by the Travel Committee, an act relating to state lands.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, they do so with the do pass recommendation on Senate File 16. And with that, I'll go ahead and explain it. This might be the most simple, easiest bill that we have today. And all it is, just for a little background, if you recall, the Sutton State Archaeological Site, we passed this bill last year. We found out that, it's adjacent to the Red Ochre Mines, which basically, when John Sutton died, he donated the site, and they apparently got the, over on page 2, if you take a look at lines 6 through 10, apparently the survey was wrong. And so we don't want to, obviously mess around with the power site. They're doing a lot of testing over there, and I don't know if they have any plans to develop that or not, but basically we want to protect both sites. So this is just basically taking that out, because the way it's stated on line 4, that suffices for all of us. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for House Bill 16? I'm sensing you're ready for the question. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 16, say aye. All opposed say no. That House Bill 16 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for your consideration is House Bill 23. Would the reading clerk please read that in?
House Bill 23, Vehicle Registration, E-Certificate and Grace Period, sponsored by Representative Larson, an act relating to motor vehicles.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that with the Committee of the Whole rises to report, do so with the favorable recommendation of House Bill 23. To explain the bill, I refer to my colleague from Sweetwater County.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we have here an act in front of us that is allowing the treasurers, confirming the ability, they may, if they wish, of county treasurers to provide vehicle certificates of registration in electronic form, and amending the requirements of display vehicle registrations, license plates, validation stickers, and permits. Now, what this bill is trying to get after is the issue about a Saturday morning when you get up and you're gonna go camping, so you think, and your young son looks up and says, "Dad, your stickers are expired." And this happened to me, and I'm kind of stuck at that point. And I won't say what happened after, but it was a situation. This would allow you the ability to go online, pay for them online. You can get a electronic verification on your phone if you wish, or you could print it if you wish. These are all options if you want to try to take care of an expired plate, frankly, when you need to in a timely manner. It doesn't require you, and I'll just say in my county's situation, driving to another town to do it, generally speaking. So this allows us to do it all electronically. It is an option, and it gives our citizens an ability that they couldn't have done in the past. They said it would take approximately, he said it within a day, but I'd say a day or two they could get this mailed out to you and get a hard copy. And that's a rundown of the bill, and I'll stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions on House Bill 23? Any questions? Any questions? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 23, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. House Bill 23 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for your consideration is House Bill 40. Would the reading clerk please read it in?
House Bill 40, School District Trustee Oath of Office, sponsored by the Corporations Committee, an act relating to school district trustees.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? What is your pleasure? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the absence of Senator Case, I move that the Committee of the Whole rises to report. It does so with the favorable recommendation of House Bill 40, and no one is rising to explain the bill, so I'll also explain the bill, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, this was brought to us by our chief election officer of the state. There have been some concerns about when school board trustees take their oath of office. Current statute, everybody thought it made sense. So I'll refer you to current statute. Their term of office starts December 1st. December 1st. So basically what this bill does is say, before you can begin your term of office, you have to take the oath of office. So if we take a look at page 1, on or before December, first day of December, which is the day their term begins, they have to take their initial, and then of course within 10 days, if there's a vacancy, and then subsequently an appointment. So very simple bill, just to clarify something that there had been some questions about. And the question that come up was, if the election is first part of November and I take my oath of office by the 12th of November, then do I get to assume my duties? Well, no, you don't, because your term of office elsewhere in statute doesn't start till December 1st. So clarification in statute. Appreciate you. May God stand for any questions. Appreciate your support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No questions, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Barlow's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, they do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 40, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. House Bill 40 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for your consideration is House Bill 73. Would the reading clerk please read it in?
House Bill 73, amend and bind reclamation accounts, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to environmental quality.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure, Senator Dockstetter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recommend that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that do so with favorable recommendation of this Senate file to explain bill, Senate file of this House bill. Oh.
Is there a volunteer? Oh, there is a volunteer. Senator Nethcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Good senators, you have in front of you House Bill 73, abandoned mine reclamation accounts. As you can see here, this bill is relating to environmental quality, creating the long-term abandoned mine reclamation account. I'm not sure how we feel about the creation of accounts, but this is what this bill does. Specifying permissible uses of the account, authorizing the investment of funds, which we know we do love to do, and specifying the limits of liability for the funds in the account. We are repealing the abandoned mine lands fund balancing account, specifying the transfer of funds from repealed accounts and providing for an effective date. So what we're doing here is actually creating the long-term the reclamation account for abandoned mine funds. The treasurer shall receive up to 30% of the amount of all funds and invest those into the account. The earnings from that account shall be credited to the account. The liability of the state to fulfill the requirements of this section is limited to the amount of unobligated, unexpended funds in the accounts. So a limitation on how the funds can be used there. The state shall have no obligations under this section except to the extent of federal funds deposited into this account and the earnings of the account. No funds in the account shall be expended for any purpose not specified in the federal law under the IIJA Act, which is the new act that's been created. And of course, you know that the purpose of the abandoned mine reclamation account, you could see it there in Romanettes 1, 2, and 3. We previously had the abandoned mine land funds balancing account, which is repealed by the effectiveness of this act. The state auditor is required to transfer funds from the repealed balancing account to this new account created for the purposes of abandoned mine reclamation, and the ability for those funds to be matched with the federal funds for the ICJA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott. Any questions for Senate file or House Bill 73? Any questions? Any questions? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have two questions. What has been the source of the account that we're now repealing? What is the source of the funds that went into the abandoned mine land funds account, balancing account, excuse me? So that's the first question. And then there was a mention, I think, in the explanation about a matching. So what is the source and how much is being transferred? And the second question is, when I read the source of the additional source of this new funds, it looks like this is a federal act. It's actually not AML type monies. It must be something else. So just a little clarity on what these new funds coming in are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions before we, yes. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I recall from the testimony, what occurred was there was the old abandoned mine land fund that we had. Now there's been new funds allocated in the IIJH funding. And so now what we're doing is we're just trying to solidify those two accounts to move and put them all into one place. And so the new one is a little bit different than the matching one, so we needed to move that fund over. And I'll try to get some more detail on that for the second reading, but talk to our folks at the appropriate agencies. Thank you.
Any other questions on House Bill 73? Hearing none, sensing are ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Duckstetter's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 73, say aye. All opposed say no. That bill passes. House Bill 73 passes the committee of the whole. Next bill for your consideration is House Bill 11. Please read that in.
House Bill 11, engrossed, State Land Lease Amendment, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee, an act relating to state lands.
Senator Steinmetz, do you want to talk about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a recommendation that House Bill 11 do pass. And for an explanation of this good little bill, I call on the senator from Park County.
Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is another bill that's really, really simple. We got assigned this for the interim topic, one of them, and it just states that the payment acceptable to the director can be used for your lease payment. As you can see, there was other items listed there, but I think they kind of forgot we now can have credit card payments and debit card payments or payments like that. And maybe in the future, we might be able to have a gold payment, huh? But I'd ask for your aye vote.
Any questions on House Bill 11? Senator Scott, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is another state land leasing bill. Declare conflict, same reasons before.
Conflict for Senator Scott. Conflict for Senator Scott. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wanting to know why the committee went with payment acceptable to the director. I don't want to see black helicopters here, but what if the person that owes that payment says, well, I've got this really nice watch? Or something along those lines, and they get creative, and as long as the director's okay with that, maybe we're not okay with that. So just a little more discussion on why we went with payment acceptable to the director rather than something a little, clarifying that it could be an electronic payment or a credit card or debit card payment.
Other questions before I call on the maker? Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Senator Steinmetz, you want to answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sure, I'd take a stab at it. So basically, that is conforming language with how the statute is written. The director has discretion over other aspects of payments and how they're handled. And so it was conforming language that the staff provided. The other thing that this bill does is it allows that the postmark date is the date in which the application is received by the office. That's a very important aspect of this bill. As we saw during one of our last snowstorms, a postal truck got stuck on the interstate and there was no flexibility to receive that application in the office past the due date. So these are all just necessary amendments to this office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, good senator from Goshen County explained that real well. Originally, it was started to get credit card payments added to the language in here, and then that kind of started going all over the place. Before it had money orders, checks, it was just getting to be a big laundry list of things, and I even tried to get the only constitutional money in there, which is gold, and we had that in there for a while, and then we just kind of morphed it into a payment acceptable by the director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Turn my phone off. Any other questions? Any other things to come? Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 11, say aye. All opposed, no. That bill squeaks by. House Bill 11 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for your consideration is House Bill 14. Would the reading clerk please read that in? That's got some amendments. Yeah.
House Bill 14, prior authorization regulation, sponsored by the Labor Committee, an act relating to the insurance code.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Baldwin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with an aye vote on House Bill 14, prior authorization regulations. And there is an amendment. I ask it to be read in, please.
House Bill 14, Standing Committee Amendment number 1, page 1, line 4, delete.
Thank you very much. I will now turn for explanation of this bill, which is an early frontrunner for kumbaya moment of the session, to Senator Dockstader.
Thank you.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll focus on the amendment. The reason he says that, a lot of people came together, worked on this in the interim. When it became apparent that we needed to work with our providers, our insurance folks, to make sure that the prior authorizations were moving through at a little faster pace. We were getting situations where essentially people, healthcare providers, are waiting for their funding. And so we got together, put this bill together over the interim. The reason he says that we've got a kind of a kumbaya moment, if we can use that term on the floor, we had a lot of people come together, insurance companies, I'm not going to say proper names, but the associations related to healthcare, the societies related to healthcare, 12 different, I think, professions and organizations coming together. They all lined up in the committee meeting and says, we're together on this. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go through the amendments that we did on House Bill 14. And I'll ask
Senator
for
Dockstader, would you like to move that?
Oh, yeah,
House bill?
Yes, move the amendment.
Amendment?
Certainly. Move committee amendment to, I move the committee amendment to House Bill 14. So this is it, folks. Might be a yawn moment in the afternoon, but I'm going to go through these because this is the bill now. This is what we've got. Page 2, we delete the entity of the legislative findings. There was pushback. We didn't need findings in there. Page 6, definition of step therapy for purposes regulating a very small aspect of it later in the bill. Page 7 through 9, we broadened the language to include all healthcare providers as currently defined in the statute, rather than limiting to the specificity of physicians. We introduced a version that had healthcare professionals. The House amended the language to read healthcare provider throughout. Page 11, we shifted from consultation prior to denial to post-denial peer-to-peer consultation. Shifted the language requiring a consultation between the insurance company and a provider before an adverse determination to codify the peer-to-peer consultation post-denial. This process was far more palatable to insurers, but still honors the intent of offering a meaningful pathway for providers to discuss medical necessity and patient care with a decision maker at the insurance company, and argue on behalf of the patient regarding the need or value of a procedure, treatment, or medication. Put them at the table earlier, got the discussion going so that we could provide the health care and follow up with providing the funding. Pages 13 and 14, urgent and non-urgent timeliness. Required timeliness for an insurance company to render a decision on a prior authorization request. This is on page 13 and 14. Changed urgent timelines from 24 hours to 72 hours on non-urgent, 5 business days to 5 calendar days. Prior authorization on page 15 maintains the requirement that a prior authorization be valid for not less than 1 year for outpatient authorizations and pharmaceutical prescriptions, and clarifies that inpatient authorizations be not less than 1 day. Page 18, prohibition on any requirement to repeat previously failed step therapy protocols. Prohibition for any insurance companies to require a patient to repeat a previously failed step therapy protocol as long as the appropriate documentation or proof of the previous failure is provided. We're getting close to the end here. Gold card exemption amendments comes on page 20. Provider exemption from prior authorization gold carding. This maintains the intent of providing a mechanism by which a provider can achieve exempt status for certain procedures with individual insurance companies. Gold carding can be achieved after the provider seeks authorization for 5 procedures and is granted authorization for 4 of the 5 requested with each individual insurance company. Amendments honor requests made by the insurance stakeholders to make the language more workable, such as the ability to do a full year look back in auditing prior claims and lifting the number of times an insurer can audit those claims. And finally, the effective dates immediately for the purpose of promulgating the rules, July 1st, 2024 for the entire bill, January 1st, 2026 for the gold carding to allow insurance companies to build out required technology and modify existing systems to implement gold carding. This was difficult, complicated. We met both as a committee. We met, I guess we can call them study sessions, out to Casper, met with all the parties involved, sitting around the table working out these details. It was a long, lengthy process, and this is where we are as we come back into session with House Bill 14, prior authorization regulations. Ask for your approval.
The amendment, we're on the amendment number 1 to House Bill 14. Is there any questions or any discussion on the amendment? It's kind of a small, simple amendment. Hearing no questions, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 14, please say aye.
Aye.
Yeah, that was an amendment. Oh, is it? Oh, excuse me, that was a standing committee, not a Committee of the Whole Amendment. But you said aye for it anyway. All opposed, say no. That amendment passes even though there's a no back there. We're back on the bill, House Bill 14. Is there any discussion on House Bill 14? Question being called. I think that was Baldwin also, wasn't it? All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 14, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That House Bill 14 squeaks by. And your next bill, for your listening pleasure, is House Bill 21. Let's read that baby in.
House Bill 21 engrossed, charter school leasing, sponsored by the School Facilities Committee, an act relating to K-12 school facilities.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole rise to report does so with the recommendation that House Bill 21 do pass. I will yield to Senator Rothfuss for an explanation of the House bill.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 21 was the work of the Select Committee on School Facilities during the off-season. It's a nice, simple one-pager, which is always nice, and it repeals 21.3110A10A3. That particular provision of statute is the school facility leasing statute for charter schools that requires that a charter school cannot apply for leasing for 3 years, for the first 3 years. And that was in statute previously because we had a double funding provision for charter schools for their first year that provided upfront costs, and then the expectation was that those first 3 years of leasing payments would be somehow coming out of that. Since we passed legislation over the past couple of years that has eliminated that upfront first-year double funding, it is now inappropriate to have this 3-year delay. So this is a repeal of that three-year delay, which would allow any charter school in their first 3 years to receive appropriate funding for their school facilities, assuming that they're leasing that facility. Mr. Chairman, that's all this legislation does. It's important to make sure that we're appropriately treating our charter school students and providing them with sufficient resources to have an adequate education. Ask the body to vote aye. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on House Bill 21? Questions on House Bill 21? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Scott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report that do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 21, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say aye. That bill snuck by. And it has passed, the House Bill 21 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill for your consideration and listening pleasure is House Bill 32. Will you please read that in?
House Bill 32, Geological Sequestration Unitization Amendments, sponsored by the Minerals Committee, an act relating to environmental quality.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recommend that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report that I do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 33. To explain the bill, Senator Rothfuss.
Point of order, I believe it's House Bill 32.
Yeah, excuse me.
32.
House Bill 32.
Yes. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 32, Geologic Sequestration Unitization Amendments, was the work of your joint Minerals Interim Committee, and it's an excellent piece of legislation that goes back into statutes that were originally written back in 2011 related to pore space associated with carbon capture, underground sequestration, and basically upgrades those statutes without substantial policy changes. So it was a deep dive into the language to make sure the language was doing what the language needs to do. It hasn't been revised in the past 12 years, and so we wanted to take the opportunity to modernize the language and make sure it did exactly what it needed to do, recognizing that this is now going to be a portion of statute that will have a lot of use in the years ahead. So a good bit of work went into it. We had a technical working group through the Minerals Committee that met probably 5 times through working group meetings during the interim to just go over the language and ensure that it was properly reflecting what it needed to do. There's a couple of purposes that went into it. One is to ensure that the pore space owners, which are currently the surface owners, would be adequately compensated for their pore space. It helps to clarify the roles of the Department of Environmental Quality and the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and where their various lines are drawn. And it also allows for certain activities to take place prior to unitization, which is the focus of this. So a DEQ permit can allow for drilling, but the unitization order has to be put in place prior to actual injection. And I'm going to walk through fairly quickly the bill, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to go into the specific language. But a lot of it was really just wordsmithing. Page 2 onto page 3 is discussion of the DEQ's permit requirements. On page 3, eliminate draft because DEQ does not issue draft permits, but they will provide discussion with applicants. And it separates the permit into 2 pieces, construction of the injection well and then geologic sequestration, to allow those to be done at different times to help facilitate the less bureaucratic development of the process. Page 3 is a common change that will occur a number of times, including specific reference to Class 6 wells, now that we have clarification at the federal level of how a Class 6 well operates. On to page 4, 2 new definitions. The first is economic benefits. This is important. The discussion around economic benefits is that these economic benefits are very specifically to the pore space owner. And we wanted to make that very clear so that they were not looked at in a broader sense, maybe economic benefits to the state or economic benefits to other interest holders. It's very much just the economic benefits to the pore space owners, and we wanted to clarify that. Unit area definition relates to the pore space that is under discussion and that is going to potentially be unitized. We worked on that definition. You'll see that there's updates throughout the statute. On to page 5 is a series of specific requirements related to unitization applications with the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And all of this is effectively updating language that is modernizing that language to reflect the new definitions and looking at specifically pore space and unit area. So we see that theme going through onto page 5, onto page 6, a minor alteration in the notification requirement for anybody that is within 1/2 mile boundary of the unit area, which is consistent with other OGCC activities, so that sort of conforms it with other statute. Page 7 is conforming language. Page 8 is conforming language with the exception of the addition of a requirement in Romanet 10 that the location of any identified and existing wells, whether previously plugged or not, that may require evaluation, monitoring, and corrective action be included in that application. On to page 8, conforming language about Class 6 well draft permits. Same thing on to page 9, conforming language about Class 6 well permits issued by the department to make the findings required in this paragraph. Further conforming language in the rest of page 9. Going on bottom of 9 to page 10, though, a little bit of discussion for purposes of this paragraph. Federal injection fees, federal lease payments, and other consideration derived from federal leases shall not be considered. This gets to the economic benefit aspect, and we wanted to make sure that it was clearly focused on the pore space owner only. Conforming language in the rest of the page. On to page 11, this is a discussion of the process for the permit approval, and what was actually done here was more of a conformance of the statute to the reality of how this would occur. The existing language didn't make any sense and was actually entirely unworkable, so we just went back through, and it's a fair hearing process that's provided at this point. On to page 12. one additional provision, that there was desire for clarity when this was originally anticipated. The level of directional drilling was not as it is today, so we added an M paragraph to ensure that directional drilling can be accommodated in the unitization orders. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. It becomes effective immediately, and then rules and regulations can be promulgated in accordance. I would note that this is I think, a universally supported piece of legislation. It's a top priority for our oil and gas producers throughout the state, as well as those that are interested in CCUS projects. I hope the body will support it. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions on House Bill 32? Oh, all kinds of questions. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My law firm represents a client that would be affected by this bill, so I'll be declaring a conflict.
Senator Beitman.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh. Excuse me, I turned on another B. Sorry, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions. First, is there going to be a maximum size on these units? How big can these units be? Question number two would be, if there is a sequestration unit in existence and an oil and gas operator wants to drill a oil well through this pore space, would they be allowed to do so? Or would a sequestration unit render that area off limits to further activity? And third question would be, what is the economic value for the pore space owners? How much money are they going to make on this? And how do you derive economic value from pumping CO2 into the ground? Those are my three questions for now, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Senator Hutchings.
Yes, Mr. Chair. There was a part, I'm sorry, I kind of was writing down the other questions, and maybe the good senator from Laramie can help me with this. He went over a federal piece that he says, oh gosh, I can't remember where it was. There won't be any action there. Can he explain that further? It was on the top of one of the pages. Let me find it really quickly. Oh yeah, I think it was on the top of page 10. The injection fees, federal leases, payments, and others, you just kind of said, shall not be considered. Can you explain that a little bit further for me? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Any other questions before the Senator Hicks?
So, Mr. Chairman, I've got a series of questions, and maybe I should just start out and let the sponsor ask a couple of these, but it really gets to the nature of the pore space. And when we talk about each individual's contributing pore space, how is that calculated from a standpoint of capacity? So is it just strictly acres, or is it acres times capacity within those acres? And then kind of a follow-up question there, is it anticipated when we use the class 5 injection wells, usually those are going into pressurized formations. So how does that affect the capacity of the pore space in those? And how do you then adequately adjust? And then who makes those determinations? Is that the department that says, well, we've got such and such geological formation, we're going to inject this amount at this pressure, it's going to displace that? I'm just trying to understand how that would actually work from a standpoint of calculating who gets how much of that pore space within a unit. Because if it's simply an acre per acre estimate or something, and then I've got a follow-up question.
Okay, would anyone like to answer those? Kind of a stump the chump kind of a thing. Senator Rothfuss, you're going to give it a whirl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just running through those answers to the good senator from Sheridan County about the maximum unit size. I don't believe there was any discussion about the maximum unit size. I can double check with OGCC about that discussion, but it's my understanding that it's going to be appropriate based on where the injectors will be and where there will be how many landowners would be unitized based on the need for that injection and what the project would look like. So I don't believe there is a maximum unit size, but I will double check on that. Regarding the drill through concept, it's a great question, and we've had that discussion a number of times. So the mineral estate owner is going to effectively have primacy and access ability to the mineral estate. We've had discussions about what that might look like if you have to perforate a zone that is targeted for Class 6, and honestly, we don't have anything in statute, I would say at this point, that quite takes care of that. Hopefully we'll have a ways off for that, but the discussion has gone towards, if you've got that situation, it's probably pretty unlikely that you're going to be approved for a Class 6 well. So the approval process has a lot of input towards, is this an appropriate permanent geological sequestration? And if you're going to have to be perforating it to get to a mineral estate, then I would expect that not to be an acceptable zone or formation to use for permanent geological sequestration. So I would say that while that might be technically up in the air and something that we've talked about in committee, and I think we might need to address through statute, I don't think there'll be anything approved along those lines. Contemplating the economic value for this pore space and how is that done? At this point, it's very up in the air what the market is going to look like and what the value of the pore space is going to be. Our Office of State Lands tried to do some preliminary calculations and I think has some preliminary projections that they're using to work in agreements with interested parties that want to potentially sequester on state lands. But in my understanding, and I guess I'd look to some others that have been part of the Minerals Committee, and maybe they have some other ideas more specifically, we really don't quite know how that's going to turn out in terms of the valuation, but it will be based on, obviously, pore space, available volume, and how much displaceable volume is going to be available for injection in that pore space. So the dollar figures are yet to be addressed by market. Going to the good senator from here in Laramie County's questions, on page 10, talking about the federal calculations and how that's done and why. The discussion there was to ensure fair and adequate compensation to the pore owner, which at this point is still the surface estate owner, although severability is statutorily possible. That federal leasing and federal royalties and basically federal rates are disregarded in the calculation and private rates are used instead, recognizing the potential for the federal government to have incentives and policy incentives that would allow them to accept a lower cost, for example. So the interest of the working group was to not allow the value to be biased by federal rates and to make sure that it was only using free market data in setting what an appropriate unitized payment would end up being. And to be clear for those that might not be tracking exactly what's going on here, you will probably have a certain portion of the pore space owners within a unit that have agreed to the terms of the unit for leasing purposes and for revenue purposes. And then you may have other parties that end up being unitized that haven't necessarily signed in. This legislation makes sure that they are held whole or made whole as a part of that, and they receive fair compensation consistent with the market value of those other private landowners rather than injecting a bunch of federal property where maybe those rates are lower. I hope I made that clear, and if that is unclear, I'd be happy to try and address that again. To the good senator from Carbon County, how do we calculate that pore space? Is it just based on acres? Mr. Chairman, in an ideal situation, acres would be a proxy for it. And in some formations, acres is a fair proxy. But when you have a significant amount of deviation in your formation where the thickness of the formation may vary depending on your surface point, the porosity of that formation may vary as well as other conditions about, perhaps pressure and injectivity and other considerations. All of those can be variable. So the plan that is submitted for the unitization request includes all of those things, and it's required to include all of those things, a full characterization of the geology and a justification for how the unitization order will provide for the division. And it may just come down to surface acres looks just great. And so that would be reasonable if the geology suggests that that's reasonable. If it doesn't, then it would have to be countermanded, and there would be obviously the possibility of a private property owner rejecting and bringing opposing geological information to protest the initial application if they don't feel, for example, surface acreage was sufficient because maybe they have substantially thicker formation in their part of the land. So what we talked about in the way we wrote this was to make it very clear that there is the capacity to do it based on true available pore space, and that three-dimensional geology underlies all of the decisions, even if it ends up being simplified. That's all of them for now. Happy to answer any more.
And I think there will be more. Senator Hicks, you're first.
Please.
Yes, you have it.
So under Class 6 wells, those are usually deep, high-pressure injection wells. And we've had some issues here in the Wyoming with the past, and this gets to the issue of liability. So what happens in a situation, who's liable? And I'm assuming under that Class 6, if it's filed in your name under that, you have liability. And the reason I bring that up is it's all going to be contingent upon how well that's cased and cemented and everything else to isolate those formations. Some of us will remember a few years ago, there was quite an issue with some water contamination with some wells, not particularly Class 6 injection wells, but the thing can happen. So ultimately, when we're running these high-pressure wells here, there's always the potential that either through geology or just a poor cementing job that you can get communication back up and around the backside. In a situation like that, you could result in potential contamination of other potable groundwater and stuff like that. So who would potentially have the liability if we ended up in a situation if there was cross-contamination or something of that fact?
Senator Cooper, I believe you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to address a couple things here. We talked about how do you determine the value of the pore space, just like you do with an oil and gas well. You got so many acres, the formation is this many feet thick, and you have a percentage of porosity through that zone of interest. So just like you would do your reservoir engineering, just like you would calculate it for how much oil's in place, how much CO2 can be put in place. It's the same engineering exactly. It's nothing new. There's no magic. The more viable that formation and that particular unit has, the more it calculates that it can hold, then the more valuable the pore space is. It's that simple. As far as how do you determine that number, right back to the same thing. Reservoir engineering, this is a 100-year-old process or more. We've got control wells when they go out and drill these projects. They've already determined the geology on this whole area. They can tell you, the geophysicist, the geologist, can tell you how big that area is, how much volume it'll hold. It's pretty straight up. As far as penetration, like the good senator said, minerals takes precedence. What's the last thing we just discussed here? The liability is the same as an oil and gas operator. If you're the operator, you're liable. As far as the safety of it, we've been putting CO2 in the ground for 40 years plus over in southwest Wyoming. This is not a new process. This is going on for years.
25% of the CO2 that's being sequestered, not for enhanced oil recovery, but it's being sequestered in the world is being done right here in Wyoming today. So this is not a new process. The engineering is very simple. There's some really great reservoir engineers out there. They're capable of doing their work. They've got to bring their science to the Oil and Gas Commission before they can get their permit. It's all there, folks. These are those black helicopters people talk about. This is no difference in developing an oil and gas lease, other than we're putting it in rather than taking it out. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cooper. Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question is from page 12, the new section you've added M. Just wondering, with the horizontal or directional wells, are all the surface owners included on the process, or do you just go down, one surface owner gets paid and the other ones just have to deal with it? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions before I call on the good Senator Bateman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the discussion. Still trying to wrap my head around the economic value of pumping plant food into the ground forever and storing it forever. I don't see who's making money going through all this cost to drill an expensive hole in the ground to pump a carbon dioxide and fill these pore spaces. Like, how is that benefiting the economy in any way? Like, who's making money doing that? You've got to pay the surface owners for their pore space. You got to pay people to drill the wells. And it's just, it sounds like a government boondoggle to me. Help me through this here, because I just don't see it.
Senator Cooper, you would like to answer that? Well, one of the people that's going to make, thank you, Mr. Chairman, one of the people that's going to make money on this is our generators, because it gives them a place to go with their CO2. The 45Q, just on this one little project north of here, is $700 million a year. Statewide, that 45Q generates about $4.5 billion a year for our generators. They make money on it. The operator of the lease makes money on it. He's out there putting the thing together just like an oil company would. The landowners make a lot of money on this, a lot of money, because not only do they get their leases, their pore space leases, or they may even be involved in the company, but they also get a royalty for every ton that's put in the ground. And that royalty depends on their lease agreement, whatever they negotiated when they started. It might be $1 a ton, might be $3 a ton. But the landowners make a lot of money on this. If you're putting 1 million tons a year in one well, or 1.5 million, that's somewhere between $3 and $4.5 million a year royalties that go to that landowner. So who's going to make money on this? Everybody, including the state of Wyoming. In the county to the north of us, that this good senator is part of, there's 2 units being developed right now. And over time, it's scary what this is going to generate. In those 2 units, there's potential for $5 billion worth of CO2 being put in the ground every year in that one county. Every year. Over the life of this project, that's a 50-year project, that's $250 billion going into being invested in that county. Okay? Not all of that goes to the operator, not all of that goes to the generator, and not all of it goes to the landowner, and there is benefits to the state in ad valorem taxes. We've got a lot of things to be developed yet tax-wise. So who makes money? The state, the landowner, the operator, and the generator. The 4 people that are involved. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cooper. Senator Bateman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with oil, you're selling the oil has value, and you're making money, and it adds value throughout the system. Here it sounds like carbon dioxide has no value other than plants turning into oxygen. But I heard 45Q, and that's what generates, that's what gives carbon dioxide the value. To me, that's a giant transfer of wealth. It doesn't create anything. It's just a tax credit transferring wealth from one entity to another, and then that trickles down, and then these people make money. So, I don't know. I better just stop it while I'm ahead, but thank you.
Senator Cooper, would you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
There is a market for CO2 out there right now. There is an established value. For enhanced oil recovery, right now, it's selling for $25 to $30 a ton. That is a market value. As it becomes more scarce, the price goes up. If there's more available, the price goes down. It's that simple, supply and demand. It is, to say that it has zero value is as wrong as you can be. It has a value, it has a market value, and that market value is established in Wyoming today.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, I want to be clear, we're not starting a new program with this bill. These are amendments to modify something that's currently in statute. So we're having more maybe philosophical conversations about this. That, I'm not saying you can't have those conversations, but what I would respectfully suggest is now we're actually understand more about the process, the regulatory regime that may be necessary, and these are adjustments that are being brought to us to say, okay, we understand more than we did 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Now, where is this actually developing? So that's what I think this is about. I'm going to make and I have several years of experience as a pore space owner. So let's be clear, this is a new property right that was put into statutes about 2013 or 14, pore space. Initially, it was tied to the surface estate because it's a new property right, a new stick in the bundle of sticks. And now that bundle is being severed, meaning there are lands that are being transferred and the pore space is being retained, much of what also occurs in minerals. So there is some nuance starting to happen in this. The unitization is something we already do in oil and gas, and there's good questions being asked about, the volume, the potential volumes that are out there. Questions that when interested parties come to my family and ask for us to participate, we're asking these questions too. So I have a couple specific questions to the discussions that happened over the interim. And that has one to do with the economic benefits, the contribution, et cetera. And I understand that there is both a topographical, if you were, or an acre type thing, and there's also a depth or volumetric. So they end up with a three-dimensional. What I want to understand is how does that impact the unitization percentage, which is not in this bill, but the unitization percentage, I believe, is currently 80%. So if a company, an entity, the person wanting to do this has 80% of the pore space, then what they do is they basically force the rest of the folks into it. It's called forced pooling. And so my question and this is an oil and gas term, and we basically just transferred it over to the carbon sequestration world. And so my question is how does, I understand the economic benefits, and maybe there's a connection to actually understand the volumetric component in that. But is that also taken into consideration when we talk about the 80% and the forced pooling that a non-participating individual would have? And then can they make that case if they choose not to be unitized and they're a working interest, which would be another oil and gas term, then can they make the case that, hey, my contributing proportion or space is greater than you're giving me, or that you give me credit for? So that starts to get to the details of what we're talking about. Is I would agree that we're trying to update these things, but there are still things that aren't being addressed in this legislation, which quite respectfully to this body and to the bringers of this bill, we, and maybe some of you who are pore space owners, which if you own land right now, you're probably a pore space owner. Whether you live in the city or you live out in the country, you're a pore space owner, unless it's been severed. You probably have to deal with contractually. Meaning the statute may not actually be able to deal with some of the issues that we're talking about. The other thing I would say, and this goes to the little m, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman, I don't remember what page it is, page 12. I think that actually needs to be more specific to oil and gas. Right now, I think it's a little vague. Just talks about a well. I think it has to be more specific to a recoverable hydrocarbon resource or something, so that we know exactly that they still have a hierarchy. They are a higher hierarchy, if you will, than this carbon sequestration. So there's a lot of other nuance in there, but in this bill, and things that are of interest to me. But I think the first two things fundamentally is we're not adding something new to statute. We're massaging the statutes to fit current practices, which we may not all get to cover. But more specifically, I want to know that it's not in this bill, but does economic benefit, is that part of the unitization percentage and the forced pooling that a pore space owner may be subjected to? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boner, did you have input?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along similar lines, getting a little more of the details of the draft, I'm intrigued by this concept. I think it's on page 3, where you have basically a two-part permit where you can start construction of an injection well before you have a full sequestration agreement in place for the area effects. I'm just, kind of hinging off that previous discussion of the 80% requirement to get 8% of the owners of the pore space agreeing before you move forward. Certainly, I just want to make sure this doesn't create some sort of property right. The first permit that is contemplated under this bill doesn't create some sort of additional pressure from a legal perspective towards any remaining pore space owners that may not have a unitization agreement. Just want to make sure there isn't some, we aren't putting pressure on those 20% or more of pore space owners who haven't agreed. Just want to make sure I understand this concept a little bit better.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to request a privilege of the floor, but it's up to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too am a skeptic on a lot of this stuff. It's all driven by government regulation. This transfer of wealth is hard to quantify and qualify in this situation. We're paying for it in electric rates right now with carbon capture and all other regulations on our power entities. And I too am having a hard time following the money on this bill here. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bateman, you have some more input before we get some answers?
I have just one last question. I promise this will be my last question, Mr. Chairman. So
thank you.
If you take away all the 45Q carbon credits, take away all the federal tax subsidies and credits, is there a value for this? And does this go away? Does the need for this go away? Because I'm seeing that this whole thing is derived from government creating this market out of thin air and transferring. It is a wealth transfer based on a government program. There's no real value here. It's not like oil or coal or natural gas. This is just a made up thing. And if those credits go away, all of them, is there even a market for this? And what does that do to the price of CO2?
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In reference to the good senator's comment, it changes the value, there's no doubt. What is that generator willing to pay to put his CO2 in the ground? What's that value? He either disposes of his CO2 with 45Q credits, or he disposes of it without 45Q credits. Either way, if we want to keep that coal burning in Wyoming and in the rest of the country, we have to sequester or capture and sequester that CO2. That's the way it's working in the rest of the world. We're trying hard here to keep Wyoming coal burning. Now, keep in mind, folks, this bill does not set up an actual structure for CO2 sequestration unitizing. That's already out there. It's already there. Those units are already being developed today, but they're being developed with oil and gas rules. What we're trying to do is tighten those rules up a little bit and make sure that the CO2 sequestration units, the unitization is developed exactly for CO2 sequestration. So if we do nothing, if we kill this bill, we carry on like we are. It does nothing. There's a lot of people out there who like to see us do nothing. But this tightens the rules up for CO2. That's the purpose of this bill. We're overlooking that. We're not trying to establish a value in it. We're not trying to say, yeah, you can build a unit. Those rules are already there. We're trying to tighten those rules up specifically for CO2. Look at the bill and read it. That's what it says.
Thank you, Senator Cooper. Senator Rothfuss, are you ready?
Thank you, Mr.
Or
Chairman.
wait a minute.
Oh.
Senator
No, I'm not.
Dockstader.
It's Kyle. Anybody can speak.
Senator Dockstader.
Well, a couple of things. One clarification is the landowners wanted this clarification. That's why we're at the table with this piece of legislation. We're here because the landowners asked us to be, to get this clarification taken care of. And all of a sudden set up some kind of smoke screen at the last minute and make it look like it's something that it's not. It's disappointing. For my colleagues, I find that very disappointing. Over in my county, we've been doing this for the past 8 years. We've been doing it without any formal programs. We put together early on, created a system that has 20 people going to work because of sequestration. They didn't do it with government programs. They just simply said, this is what we're going to do. It's a major company across the world. Why'd they do this? Because they know they have to change. If they want their product out there, they've got to change the way they do business. And that's what we're doing. And waiting in the wings, another 120 jobs related to that company, and waiting in the wings further down, related to sequestration, another 200 jobs. To all of a sudden say this is something new, and to create some kind of, no pun intended, a smokescreen, but to say this is bad, this is new, this is, what are we going to do with the transfer of dollars? No, we're adjusting our coal market to a changing economy. And this sets us up, if you want to know what this does for Wyoming, this sets us up for more solid jobs in the state. I'm sure all of you have spent hours and hours of windshield time trying to make sure you got jobs in each one of your counties related to minerals. It seems like that's all I do lately, is travel this state, travel to DC, travel to the Pacific Northwest, trying to save mineral-based jobs. This is what we're doing here, folks. And to create something that, some kind of tag team effort to say it's something different is inappropriate. We're trying to save the Wyoming economy and make adjustments to a changing picture out there.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hesitated to debate. You know, we're actually have entered into a policy debate rather than a bill debate. It's kind of interesting, but as a matter of comment, for a good part of the people that are talking are oil and gas. If we're going to produce oil and gas or burn coal, not just in Wyoming and the West, it's tied to exactly this. So you can fight it, you can not fight it, you can like it, not like it. But the fact of the matter is, we all live under a web of rules and regulations, and we have to operate within them. You can like them or not like them, doesn't matter. But if you want our state to go forward, and what's paid our bills, renovated this building, built our schools, has actually been minerals. And virtually every mineral in Wyoming is tied in some way to carbon sequestration at this point. You can like or not like it, but it's tied. The production of it is tied in some fashion to sequestration of carbon. So if you want to kill the carbon sequestration stuff, then you better figure out what we're going to do to go forward, because you really aren't going to have any industries that have been our base industries left. You're probably going to have some things that maybe you like less. So I'd encourage you to take a look at it, look at within the realities. Really is interesting. It's a great policy debate, but this isn't the vehicle for it in this bill.
Thank you, Senator Driscoll. Senator Kolb?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I'll comment on the bill. Yeah, I think we get into a debate about how I'll frankly say the federal government's insane on their policies and what they want us to do. But in order for us to make it to the point where they realize their policies don't work, that there won't be a future of energy production in this country, this is a necessary evil. And whether I think it's effective or not really isn't the question. The question is deal with our industry in my county that relies on this technology. And I support what the bringing the bill is trying to do for the reasons I stated. And I just think it's something we have to do, and not doing it is really going to cripple us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. Senator Jones?
Mr. Chairman, this summer, the Minerals Committee was able to go tour one of these facilities over in my area. Tons of jobs are created every day by this new industry. I think that particular one has been open for 38 years. So I know it's kind of a new concept to some of you, but it's not a new concept to people over in my area. So please consider passing this bill so that we can continue these operations.
Thank you, Senator Jones. Senator Rothfuss, are you ready again? Oh, excuse me. Senator Hutchings, sorry.
FYI, Mr. Chair, I'm a member of a surface owner association, and this is fascinating to me. So when I ask questions, I'm asking questions to gain knowledge, not just to hamper the process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We know you are, Senator Hutchings. Good job. All right, Senator Rothfuss, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are a couple of questions here that I wanted to get to. One of them was the good senator from here in Laramie County's question about how M relates to surface estate ownership. So this unitization concept with the addition of the M provision was just trying to clarify previous statute where the belief was that the intent would allow for no problems with regard to multiple pore space estate owners, pore space being permeated by a single horizontal or directional well. But there was some desire to clarify that and be explicit about it. And to the good senator from Campbell County, it's not about oil and gas. It's very much specifically to if I am directionally drilling my pore space and end up utilizing the same technologies that we use for oil and gas as I'm perforating multiple pore spaces and potentially using directional drilling to increase my injectivity, which is going to be of great value to increase that injectivity rate. The M provision just makes it clear that is allowable under this unitization. And at that point, you would have to include consideration of that in the unitization. To the good senator from Campbell County's other question regarding economic benefit and how that's calculated, this does direct that the economic benefit be calculated in the same way the unitization is calculated, which means that you need to be looking at your pore space, which gets into a pore volume basis. So you certainly would have grounds to challenge it if an operator that is unitizing comes in and says, well, we're just going to do it on a surface acre basis, and we're going to call that good, and your zone is 50% thicker than the average, you would have the capacity to challenge, no. In fact, I deserve a higher share, pro rata share, of the value of the unitized zone because I have more pore space in my formation, my pore space estate. And that actually gets at the heart of what we worked on. Mr. Chairman, it is true, we did not change the forced pooling aspect of it in any way. So existing statute still governs on, and I'm confident it is also 80-20 here in poor space as it is elsewhere. I don't think that's different in any way based on my recollection. But the discussion that we had was trying to ensure that there's recognition of the volume basis and the value of your pore space relates to the porous volume that you have in your zone, which is going to be more complex and requires much more sophisticated geology than a simple, what does your surface map look like? Those were the two key provisions that I think we're specifically debating on the bill, and a lot of the rest was just more discussion philosophically on the 45Q. And I'm not going to address those on the bill at this time, but I appreciate the debate on it.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. I sense that you're ready for the question. We've thrashed that bill pretty well. All those in favor of Senator Dockstedter's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 32, say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. That bill, after much thrashing, squeaked by. House Bill 32 has passed the committee of the whole. And Senator Cole.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor.
No.
No? Pretty please?
Go ahead, Senator Cole.
Well, thank you, most gracious Chairman. I'd like to introduce Chief Jim Walmsley from the Rock Springs Fire Department. He's up in the gallery. He came in here. He's also a rather person living in my neighborhood. And welcome, big welcome to Chief Walmsley.
Good job, Senator Cole.
Thank you.
Next bill for your listening pleasure is House Bill 26. Would the reader please read that one in?
House Bill 26, Emergency Protective Services Effective Period, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to adult protective services.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on House Bill 26, Emergency Protective Services Effective Period. Fellow senators, this is work that comes to us from the Task Force on Vulnerable Adults and Mental Health. It made its way through the Judiciary Committee during the interim. This particular bill is pretty simple. It goes into Title 35, which is the Public Health and Safety title, and into our Adult Protective Services. The change in the bill comes on page 2, and you will notice that we extend the time period for emergency protective services. We had some good testimony in our committee, Mr. Chairman, and this really stems from a request by the director of our agency that oversees our family services. 3 days is what it reads in the statutes now, and that simply is not enough time for our professionals to be called into a situation in the case of a vulnerable adult and have the time to link them up with some of the services that they try to do. This involves some of the most extreme cases, Mr. Chairman. The primary goal of our state agency folks is to get in there and to look for a guardian. This might be a case where the law enforcement has been called. It's somebody who might be in trouble with, say, a disease like diabetes, maybe poor health because of eating difficulties. Part of what might be the services provided by our professionals could be as simple as linking this vulnerable adult up to nonprofits, that might provide some lunches at lunchtime, for example. So that's really all this does. What takes place when there's only 3 days, Mr. Chairman, is that the agency has to keep going back to the court for extensions, and it becomes kind of unwieldy. I think this is a pretty reasonable bill to allow for the kind of time that the agency wants to take to get people into a better situation. This might be adults that could be exploited, for example, financially or otherwise. And so that's when our agency tries to roll in and help folks. Hope you'll support the bill. Be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions on House Bill 26? House Bill 26, yes. Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was brought to my attention by a constituent, basically, that their parent was removed from the home and was forced to take on services and treatments that they didn't want. So what we're wondering is, what are the safeguards that you've provided for that vulnerable adult? Are they taken out of the home, or is the threat taken out of the home? 72 hours, I get that now, while you say you might need to have that extended. But one of the concerns was, if that parent is taken from the home instead of the threat, where are they taken? And the vulnerable adult, do they have some type of representation to help them when their family's not around? If those could be answered, I'd appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do appreciate the conversation on this. So first of all, these emergency services are ordered by a court. It's not the agency coming in and said, okay, we're going to do this and take it. It's a court. If you look on line 12, existing statutory languages, if the court finds, line 13, the vulnerable adult has been, and there's a list of things, abused, neglected, exploited, intimidated, abandoned, and an emergency exists. So first of all, let's be clear. This is not the agency going in there and making a determination. This is the agency taking information and going to the court, and the court making a determination about this. The time from 72 to 14, I think we can probably all understand. And when you actually look at the language in current statute, 72 hours excluding weekends and holidays, have a 4-day weekend, in 3 days you're already at a week. You can't hardly get services on a weekend or a holiday, so we're not really gaining very much by that. So that's the timeline. And then as far as, does the individual have representation, take a look at the current language. This is current statute, page 2 of the bill, lines 11 to the remainder of the bill. The vulnerable adult, agent, court-appointed representative, or the department. So there is all other folks involved in this process, including it may be a family member, et cetera, that can petition the court to set aside the order or modify the order, including whether there should be an order or not. So I think I want to just keep perspective that this is not an agency or some caseworker saying, oh, I'm taking you out of the home. This is a court that is hearing the information and intervening on the behalf of this vulnerable adult after they have heard the allegations or the concerns brought forth before them. So hope that answers some of the questions. Certainly stand for more and ask for your favorable consideration of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Any other questions on House Bill 26? Oh, Senator Bouchard? Oh, excuse me. There.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So here's the problem here. Yeah, it's a court, but what happens is somebody makes allegations, and the way this was originally set up, and this is the way many states do this with 72 hours, is the court actually says, okay, Mr. Complainant, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. We'll go check this out. This person may be detained in a medical facility for 72 hours, and then determining in that 72 hours what's going on, then we move forward, but at that point they have to release them if they don't find anything. So what can happen is with this kind of stay, you have an incentive on the other end to keep somebody in a hospital for 14 days, to evaluate for 14 days. And there isn't a way to say, hey, I mean, there isn't a safeguard to say, why don't we let them turn them loose in 72 hours? And so at that time, somebody is accruing a bill for care. And what if there really wasn't, what if it was just an accusation at that point that, or alleged problem that isn't true? So most states that do these 72-hour holds, it's long-standing. It's been that way for a long time. You don't see them, and some of these states have lots of population, and they're not saying, hey, we gotta extend these hours. So I'm not convinced that this is something we need to do. I mean, if there's a problem, there probably needs to be a second step or something else that has to happen. But if you're gonna hold somebody for 72 hours because somebody's made an allegation, we should be able to figure out 72 hours if there's a problem. And that, because what you got is a court saying, let's do something for 72 hours. And then that court's going to respond back if there's something found in 72 hours. So I would say move very cautiously with this kind of legislation, because there could be some really bad consequences from this.
Thank you, Senator Bouchard. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that there's a tendency in this discussion, even in my own mind, to have a little confusion. There's another process in our statutes called a Title 25, and that is a different process. There is a different set of court timelines, et cetera. There is an initial person, and they don't actually go to the court for 72 hours. They have 72 hours before they can even do that, before they even have to go to the court. And then there's a 10-day, it's called a 109 hearing, the first one. Then there's a 110 hearing, and then you can actually go and extend that beyond that. So I'm just cautious. I'm not saying that my colleague is getting these confused, but in my own mind, I have to clarify to myself which one we're talking about. In this case, they can't be taken in, they can't receive this care unless the court says it from the very beginning. There is no initial thing. The case officer, whoever it is, has to go to the court to begin with, which is different than the Title 25, which is more related to mental health. This is a vulnerable adult where there may be mental health involved. There's other things going on from the list in the bill. The second thing about accruing a bill, that's another one that is more specific to Title 25. And in this case, my best understanding is the department, if they are asking for the care to take care of somebody and do this, they are covering the bills necessary for that period of time. So I'm not suggesting my colleague is mixing the two, but in my own mind, Mr. Chairman, I have to clarify it for myself, and maybe it's of edification to the body. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. And Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what I want to clarify is I have a file sitting on my desk that has a back and forth case, police reports, where the family has gotten into an argument over property, and it's turned into, well, they're vulnerable adults, but yet there's people trying to take property, there's accusations going back and forth. I'm worried that when we do things like this, and the court isn't saying, hey, in 72 hours, we're going to make a decision to either have a further protection, or they've investigated and just said, hey, there's not a problem here. That's what I see here, is we're going right, why didn't we do something in here that gives the court another step after 72 hours in statute, instead of just going right for a longer section?
Thank you, Senator Bouchard. Senator Landon, are you ready?
Boy, I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and really appreciate the debate, the good questions. As I said, this goes into our public health and safety, and testimony in our committee is, Mr. Chairman, that these vulnerable adult situations are on the increase. I think that perhaps is due to the fact that we have an older population making its way up through. But a couple of things, and a big thanks to the senator who served on the Mental Health Task Force, who also happens to be a former chairman of the Labor and Health Committee on the other side. It really helps for all of us to understand when it's explained a little bit better. I would take you to the bottom of Article 107 and just read a couple of passages that you don't see in your bill. The court shall order these services necessary to remove the conditions creating the emergency and shall specifically designate the authorized services. And another thing that paragraph goes on to say, Mr. Chairman, is that these orders can be extended now for up to 30 days. So really, this is all about the opportunity to try to get a vulnerable adult hooked into the right kind of services to improve their lives. Again, this is the agency working in tangent with law enforcement. This could be law enforcement or the local DA who eventually ends up going to court if they feel like the situation is dire enough. And so hope that helps to explain the bill. Again, I appreciate the dialogue.
Other conversation, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as a member of the task force this summer and a kind of a practitioner in this area, there is a great deal of confusion of the facts that come to be. And one is how these type of protective measures potentially can be abused. I think one of the bases for extending the 14 days and a fact pattern that I think is also important to consider is, let's say, for example, it's not this exploitation, but rather an adult that is self-neglect. And so you have an elderly, vulnerable adult, and they have to meet that definition of vulnerable adult that is committing self-neglect. That an emergency exists. So the statute also requires there be an emergency. So not just generalized self-neglect, that they could be doing a better job of care, but an emergency exists such so that they may not be eating, that their health is in extreme jeopardy, that they may, their health is at extreme risk. That adult also lacks the capacity. So you have to have an emergency, you have to have a vulnerable adult. The vulnerable adult needs to lack capacity to consent to the provision of services. And that a court may order the department to provide protective services on an emergency basis. And the court shall order only those services necessary to remove the conditions creating the emergency. And so what would that be in the situation of a neglected adult? That could be some home health care, that could be a caseworker dropping in, that could be temporarily getting that vulnerable adult some health care, get them back on their medication, get them some food for that temporary period of time. Other protections available to vulnerable adults that present themselves not in these kind of emergency, the state is involved because the police have been called because there's a vulnerable adult. Those include conservatorships and guardianships. And so if there's concerns of an internal family fight and a vulnerable adult may be financially exploited or physically exploited, then a family member or other person needs to step up and establish a conservatorship or guardianship on that vulnerable adult's behalf. That can be either voluntary or involuntary, and that restricts the vulnerable adult's accounts and authorizes that individual to take serious healthcare measures on their behalf with court approval. So there's a lot of other tools in the toolbox that we're not considering with this bill. And important to recognize, this is really when protective services gets involved on an emergency basis. They knock on the door, they see very concerning things, there's an emergency present, that adult is unable to answer questions about their situation, and we need to put serious resources in place to protect that adult on a temporary basis. There's typically multiple professional eyes on this situation. One, a caseworker from DFS, who then reaches out to neighbors and family members, and that sometimes requires more than 72 hours in order to contact those individuals. Consultation with that vulnerable adults healthcare providers, and then the court system. And so there's a lot of pieces in play. That doesn't mean circumstances are always evaluated under the best, but these are emergency circumstances where people are concerned about the health and welfare and safety and livelihood of that vulnerable adult. So there's a lot of kind of cautionary measures at play.
Thank you, Senator Northcott. Sensing you're ready to vote. Oh, yep, Senator Hutchings.
I get all that, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question that wasn't answered is where will they take that vulnerable adult if they do remove them from the home? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Senator Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting question. I'm not sure I can answer that, but I did ask the question about the allegations of the petition, that it has to be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. I didn't know what preponderance meant, not being a lawyer. And it's a high level of evidence. It's got to be a lot of evidence that shows that this vulnerable adult has been abused and that there is an emergency and they've got to take care of it. So I did talk to, because being on the judiciary, I was kind of interested in knowing how our community mental health services and a couple of our community health centers, what they thought about this. And they said that the 72 hours sometimes is just not enough time to really get to drill down and find out what it is that this person needs once they've contacted family or friends or neighbors or whatever it is. And they really felt like the 14 days, and they said, we doubt that we would ever need 14 days, but we need sometimes, quite often, more than 72. And I think the bottom line is, once they get them the services, quite often, then they sometimes kind of come around, especially if they're diabetic, and they can start making a little bit of sense, and they can always just say no. If they're to that point where it was just a situation where they weren't taking their diabetes medicine and they weren't making sense and people were concerned about them, and then once they get on the right meds and get things going, lined out, they can always just say, no, I'm good with where we are. So I don't know if that really answers the good senator's question from Cheyenne, but they could be, they could just, like as the other good senator from Cheyenne said, they could just be getting treatment in their home. They could be going to a community mental health center. There's a lot of different places they could be. It could be a hospital. It could just be setting up for Meals on Wheels and those kinds of things. But I don't know if that answers your questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Senator Landon.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Appreciate the good senator from Uintah County. Paragraph D, which follows the language in this bill, in our statute simply says the vulnerable adult may be placed by the court in a hospital or other suitable facility which is appropriate under the circumstances. The person, hospital, or facility in whose care the vulnerable adult is placed shall immediately notify the person responsible for the care and the custody of the vulnerable adult. And so, again, that adult, it can run the gamut, Mr. Chairman. It could be some in-home healthcare visits. It could be all the way to some hospitalization to get them up to speed. Just one final thought, this 14-day period allows for things such as getting them squared away with their insurance, for example. It might be because of that self-neglect described by the senator from Laramie County, it might simply be that they've lost touch with paying some bills, so they can't go and get their go to the pharmacy and get the medication that they need. And so I think this is a good fix that will allow professionals to do their job better. And just remember, this is probably neighbors and friends who were worried about somebody and sent somebody over to check on them. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 26, say aye. All those opposed, no. That House Bill 26 has sneaked by the committee of the whole. The next bill for your, yes, I am. Oh, Majority Floor Leader. Hicks, Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I request the committee of the whole stand at ease to the sound of the gavel for about 10 minutes for staff to take a break. And so just when we come back, my plan is to work through House Bill 71 and then we will adjourn for the day. So when we get back, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, but let's give staff a little break right here.
Without objection, we'll stand at ease till I sound the gavel. Right? Yeah, okay. 2-minute warning for your break. One-minute warning. Break's over. Let's get back at it. Committee of the whole, come back to order. We're short a little bit. We're going to get a few more in. Here we go. There we go. We're in now. Okay, the next bill for your enjoyment tonight is House Bill 27. Would you please read it in?
House Bill 27, DFS and law enforcement cross-reporting, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to adult protective services.
House Bill 27, you've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on House Bill 27, DFS and law enforcement cross-reporting. Fellow senators, this goes into those same statutes that we just had a good debate about. This takes a step back, however. Let's go to a little bit prior to the order that we talked about in the court. Let's just say that a neighbor or a friend is concerned about an adult, what we would term a vulnerable adult, and the first call they're going to make, Mr. Chairman, is to 911. They're going to call law enforcement. Law enforcement is going to go over and check on that person. And all this bill does, if you go to the bottom of page 1, top of page 2, is to simply say that if law enforcement contacts one of these individuals, one of these vulnerable adults, it just requires the law enforcement agency to contact the agency that takes care of our family services. Earlier in this section of the statutes, the department of the Family Services Unit always contacts law enforcement. What this does, Mr. Chairman, is just close the loophole on that communication piece to make sure that everyone in that particular community is aware of what's going on with Uncle Charlie. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. I hope you'll support it. Again, we have a couple of our senators who served on that task force. I'm sure they can help answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Any comments, questions? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious what the background is on that, because what it looks like is that previously there was some discretion, and at this point in time, the intent is to remove the discretion. And I'm wondering what the story is there. I can see circumstances where discretion might be beneficial, where there's clearly no problem. A law enforcement officer shows up and says, all right, there's no problem here. We don't need to bring anybody else into this. We'll let it go. And I guess I'm worried about taking away that potential for discretion, but perhaps that was being mismanaged. So perhaps a little more background on what's actually happened and why we're doing this.
Other questions before I call on Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate that, that inquiry. Actually, so when this was brought to us, as I'm sure the good chairman of Judiciary spoke about, the conduit of information was one way. The department was providing information to law enforcement, but it wasn't going the other way. So we're trying to clarify that. The second part of that the good minority floor leader brought up was about that discretion determines that a vulnerable is abused, neglected. Well, that actually goes to the bill we just had, because if you'll recall, it's the court that makes that determination, not a law enforcement officer. So this is a combination of several bills, but you're getting them in discrete pieces because they're kind of different in the fact that, anyway, they seem to be more than one title, if you will. So we broke them out into different bills, but they are interrelated, you will note. So I think that this is about transfer of information, understanding, so we're not duplicating or replicating or, using resources that don't need to be resources. But you are correct in the observation that this is taking some discretion away from an officer. And that takes me back to Title 25. Recall in Title 25, it is law enforcement, subsequent, and then a health professional that can make a titling decision for that first 72 hours. In this statute, it was at least the understanding and belief of the group and the agency and law enforcement that they did not want that level of latitude in this case. So even though it's in current statute, they're actually not doing it. They're still going to the court. So whatever latitude you see in this is not, at least our understanding, was not being exercised. They were still going to the court for a determination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Anyone else? Anyone else? Senator French, are you ready?
Mr. Chairman, I begged you to call on me an hour ago and you wouldn't do it, so.
Any other questions on House Bill 27? Oh, Senator Scott, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, and this bill really is concerning me because and I'm really following up on what the minority leader brought to us. It seems to me that, and maybe I'm missing something here, Mr. Chairman, but somebody gets mad at something. Somebody decides I didn't vote right down here. They put in a report, call 911, says vulnerable adult. The sheriff comes out and finds me, finds which field I'm in doing my irrigating. He doesn't have any choice to say, oh, forget it. There's no problem here. He's got to turn me into DFS. And I really wonder if we aren't losing the ability with this bill for common sense to set in an early stage of the proceeding and opening this statute to a harassment that is not intended. And yes, eventually you can put a stop to it, but you could do quite a bit of damage before then. So Mr. Chairman, I think we need to think pretty hard about this bill, because at this point, my instinct is this one needs to be voted down.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I think we probably need to keep working on this one a little bit and talk about it. But I do wonder where that mechanism of sanity checking the situation comes into play. And I guess I'm not tracking it well enough yet. So if the good tall senator from Bates Creek's example does happen, you know, where does the sanity checking take place? So a report is made that we have a vulnerable adult standing in a field and he needs attention. And how does that actually progress? Because if law enforcement comes, we've taken away their discretion and they're going to pass it on, the report. And then I guess it's a little fuzzy to me at what point someone might just look out in the field and say, no, he seems okay, instead of having a significant process that might involve a court or some type of action, or heaven forbid somebody goes out in the field and grabs him and takes him in prior to establishing it. So how would it proceed? Can somebody who's a proponent walk us through how that would actually progress if this circumstance took place?
Senator Northcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when law enforcement gets called, right, they investigate crimes. They don't really investigate vulnerable adults. So the concerns from the tall senator from Bates Creek, unless there's an accusation that he's been a victim of a crime, does law enforcement really take any interest? And so if the tall senator is able to communicate somewhat cogently with law enforcement, I think it's all managed. Law enforcement is required to write up a quick report at the end of the day before they get to go home from shift. And so I've seen a number of these quick reports where they make contact with the vulnerable adult, do a quick exchange with the vulnerable adult, make an assessment of the house. They can already call DFS if they need to. I mean, they do that all the time. Think about with children, right? They get called to concerns of children. They come in, they call DFS. DFS comes and takes the kids. They stand by. So DFS and law enforcement work together readily. But I think the challenge here is that unless there's a crime that law enforcement needs to investigate, DFS may not ever get wind that there is a concern and that they need to provide protective services. Also, out of concern for this, everybody's calling and doing false reports, which is a crime, that does allow for them to communicate and to see statistically, right, if they're receiving a high volume of calls, because it's never just the one time when somebody's trying to make those types of allegations. We see that more often with children in custody situations, right, than vulnerable adults. Usually when there's a vulnerable adult, you don't want law enforcement involved or DFS involved because that really interferes with your ability to isolate and exploit. So I just want to say that situation for vulnerable adults is very much different than it is for children. But the need for these two types of agencies to communicate is important. The other piece is you're also assuming that law enforcement calls and police reports are not public records. And in fact, they very well can be if they're a closed investigation. And so this information is not secreted away from the department, and law enforcement, again, can either voluntarily provide it, the department can get it through public records requests. What we're really doing is just making this automatic notification about the potential need for services for these vulnerable adults.
Thank you, Senator Northcott. Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that they do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 27, say aye. All those opposed say no. House Bill 27 has passed the committee of the whole almost unanimously. The next bill for your enjoyment is House Bill. Oh, Senator Case, did you need to say something, or were you just mumbling back there?
Apparently, I did not, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to the body.
Okay. The next bill for your enjoyment is House Bill 72. She is? I can't tell.
House Bill
Senator
Senator
Nethercott,
Case?
are you standing?
I'm trying. I do feel like sitting right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with the due pass recommendation of House Bill 72, workers, is it read in, please?
Yeah, we'll do it right now.
Thank you. We'll
House
move
Bill
this thing along.
72, Workers' Compensation, Provision for Adverse Deviation, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee,
boy.
an act relating to workers' compensation.
Mr. Chairman, can I go
Nethercott,
now?
Could I call on you now?
Am I taller?
You're taller now.
Thank you, I feel better. All right, Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with the due pass recommendation of House Bill 72, Workers' Compensation, Provision for Adverse Deviation. Senator Guru.
Senator Drew, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my vertically challenged one over there. I appreciate that. We bring you, good senators, House Bill 72, Workers' Compensation Provision for Adverse Deviation, or as we lovingly call it up there in the home of happy feeling, you call your Appropriations Committee, the PFAD bill. So folks, here's the story on this bill, and then I'll go through it with you. But our workers' comp division that's housed over in that department that services workers across the way is another one of those funds that is the envy of the nation, has over $2 billion on deposit, enough to carry through every actuarial eventuality with any of its clients that are injured in workforce events. 1.1 billion of that is set aside for those events. And there's another $914 million, that is set aside for these deviations. What this bill does, frankly, is we've got more money in that account than we need. What should we do with it? This bill contemplates that and says we should refund it in part to the people who pay it. That's the industries that are in the highest risk categories. So if you just go through this bill real quick, it just provides for that to happen. And if you go to page 3 of the bill, it's kind of the meat of it. It says that the department can assess a refund from 0% to 5% based on the 5-year rolling average of the fund. Now, if you really want to get to the meat of this bill to find out what it's really doing, turn over to the last page to the fiscal impact. And what you'll see is the department has come up with a 2.5% lowering of these fees. That accounts for $23,781,000 to be returned back to the folks who pay it in those high-risk categories. What does that mean? That means that the average employer will receive, who pays $13,700 today, will have their rates lowered by over $2,500 to $11,000, $11,500, somewhere in that ballpark. And so for them, it means a $2,500 break in their workers' comp fees. In total, it means a $23 million rebate to business. That's what this bill does. Be glad to stand for any questions.
Any questions? Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm reading the language on page 3, and I understand what it does with the 5-year rolling average and the 5%. I can't find the language that it's actually going to refund that. So if you could help me out. I know that's what it's trying to do, but just looking for that specific language.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Is there any other questions before the master answers every question? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just advanced some legislation in our committee that would add a group of people onto this workman compensation
Senator,
group.
can you get closer to your microphone, please?
Yes, sir. We've just
There you
added
go.
in our committee this morning a group of people that would be added to this group, and I'm just wondering, had you considered that before advancing this bill? Are you even aware of it? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Any other questions before the answer master gets back? Hearing none. Senator Grew, it's your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as the second question about what's contemplated in another bill that's working through the body, I don't know, and I would assume at this point they probably have not taken that into consideration. But once again, I direct your attention to the back page where we go 900, not plus 900 million, and we're talking about a $23 million, $1 million refund. And so we're still in pretty darn good shape. This is kind of just a first step. We're not going too far into this, but it's just, that's where that comes from. So I think it would accommodate both, but I'll try to get that answer for you. As to the first question, let's see, as you read through page 1, and let's see, I think it's, yeah, let me get back to you in a second, but I think I got it here.
Senator McHugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to wrap my brain around this. So we have basically a $900 million surplus, and we're going to give 23 million of it back. Why is that number so small? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator McHugh. Senator Grew, you're going to answer that?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that maybe the confusion here, and I'm sorry if I gave it, the total amount that's valued in the PFAD part of the account is $914 million. That does not mean that that's how much we're over. That just means that's how much is in that, in that part of the account. Let me give you an example. Right now, or a few years ago, this body decided to allow everyone who had COVID during the height of the crisis to call that a workforce injury. And workers' comp took on that. And there were over 3,000 people here in the state of Wyoming who did that. Some, unfortunately, passed. Others got better. Others are kind of in the middle. And we don't know what future maladies they may have. We're kind of still in the middle of that event as far from an actuarial point of view. So that's kind of that, and there's a few others out there that are kind of an unknown. So we have to make sure that we have money and that we're actuarially sound for any event, whether it's a death benefit or a serious injury that's debilitating that causes them not to be able to work anymore. So that's why there's that money is there. We look at the 5-year rolling average and try to see what's responsible and what we can give back to our employers because the count is very healthy, but the $914 million is not an overage in and of itself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grew. Any other questions? Any other questions? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation on House Bill 72, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. That was a landslide. House Bill 72 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for your enjoyment is House Bill 46. Please read that in.
House Bill 46, Chancery Court, Timeline for Resolution of Disputes, sponsored by Representative Walters, an act relating to courts.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on House Bill 46, Chancery Court Timeline for Resolution of Disputes. Fellow senators, this Chancery courts were born right here in the Wyoming Senate 4 or 5 years ago. We have discovered a couple of things, and that's what this bill does. It amends the statute for the Chancery Court to allow for a little bit more time in the resolution of disputes. That's really the purpose of the Chancery Court, is to provide that expeditious resolution. What we found, though, the Chancery Court is up for, and running for a couple of years now, Mr. Chairman. We heard about the fact that we're beginning to get more and more cases. That's a good thing. But 150 days from the filing timeline is actually unrealistic. The early case steps outside the court's control during this pleading stage sometimes takes between 50 and 75 days just by itself, Mr. Chairman. That means things like locating plaintiffs, serving defendants, filing a proof of service. The parties file and the court resolves any initial motions. These motions include motions for temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions, motions to dismiss, all the things that my good friends from Laramie County know about who are in the legal profession. That can include parties asserting counterclaims and cross-claims and third-party claims. This all takes quite a bit of time, Mr. Chairman. So what this bill does, if you go over to page 2, the language for the change simply says that the majority of the action filed in the Chancery Court within 150 days of the issuance of the scheduling order in each action. So we eliminate that filing stage and give the courts time, aiming for 150 days after the scheduling order is just simply more realistic, Mr. Chairman. It still allows for that expedited resolution of disputes that the statutes really were meant for, but it adds those 150 days. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Any questions? Any questions? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I am concerned that our Chancery Court effort is not having the kind of success that it needs. I wonder how this, the part of the point of Chancery Court is to get rapid dispute resolution on business disputes. And this is going against that. I had hoped that we would be able to move faster than we have in the Chancery Courts. I had hoped that we would be able to, frankly, go out of state maybe and hire a judge or two that could move here that knew what Chancery Courts did and had some experience with it. I'm afraid that if you leave the judiciary to its own devices on this, they will simply turn it into another version of a district court, and this is a first step down this road. The system really has been, our civil justice system has a number of problems, and one of them is that it is quite slow, and I'm afraid we're getting back into this. Did the committee get any evidence that this is in line with what's going on elsewhere? Or is this just the business as usual setting in and starting to destroy the value of what we're trying to create here? Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what's going on, but I want to raise those concerns because if they chip away at it a piece at a time, we won't get the kind of court that we need, and this is a major factor. If we develop a good Chancery Court, it'll be a major factor in recruiting new incorporations to Wyoming and all the business that comes with them. And if we lose it, it'll be just turned into just a waste of, I won't say a waste of money, but we will miss the effectiveness that we need. So I raise a concern about this bill.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, the testimony in the committee was quite the opposite. This court is getting underway. It's doing a good job. Things are beginning to happen. I believe the testimony was that they've had 48 cases filed, some resolved, some not through the Chancery Court, that the number this year is twice what the first year was the testimony that they have 2 judges that are district court judges that also volunteer their time to serve the Chancery Court. And that we indeed are trying to get to a point where we can have an exclusive judge or judges for the Chancery Court. With regards to the 150 days, the testimony from the bill's sponsor, who's a member of the advisory committee and to the Chancery Court, and there was another gentleman there present at the committee that gave a Me Too attaboy on this proposed change. He was from the advisory council as well, was at the court. This 150 days or 5 months, that's pretty darn rapid, actually. It really is quick, but that it's better if the clock counts from the scheduling notice for the proceeding. But really, we can talk about that time period, but I want to say that no one questioned the veracity and the improving good job that the Chancery Court is doing at our committee hearing.
Thank you, Senator Case. Anyone else? Senator Nethcott, is she standing, Helen?
How does he know I'm wearing
Senator
flats?
Nethcott.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to respond to some of the concerns and just for the Senate's, I think, information, the Chancery Court is doing really great work and they're handling some very complex civil litigation. And so what I think is more important than expediency, but is the quality of the legal precedent we are creating within the Chancery Court, which is really its purpose. It isn't, the fast resolution does not trump the quality of the precedent we are creating. If we recall, the creation of the Chancery Court was stood up with many of our efforts on blockchain, creation of new corporate entities and financial technology, and wanted to make sure that we had a very sophisticated court that was able to hear those sophisticated business disputes in addition to your traditional types of business disputes which a Chancery Court hears. The court is doing that, and the court is doing, I think, a phenomenal job on that front. And what we're seeing is, due to the complexity of the cases it's presented with, the litigants, the people who are paying to participate in the court, recognize that there's a need for this flexibility in order to make sure justice is achieved and the court is able to provide the legal precedent. And so Wyoming becomes that court that the country and perhaps the globe looks to for the resolution of these highly sophisticated business disputes.
Thank you, Senator Nethcott. Anyone else? Anyone else? Anyone else? Hearing none, sensing you're ready for the question, all those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, they do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 46, say aye. All opposed, say no. That was a massive no. I don't know, we might need a division. We'll let it slide. House Bill 46 passes the committee of the whole. The next bill for your enjoyment and completion is House Bill 71.
House Bill 71, Broadband Development Subaccount Amendments, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to economic development.
Heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure? Somebody. Oh, Senator Nethcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the due pass recommendation of House Bill 71, Broadband Development Subaccount Amendments. For that, I will attempt to explain this Joint Appropriations Committee bill. Good senators, this is a fairly kind of complex history regarding broadband accounts, but important to recognize that there are 2 programs administered by 2 federal agencies, of course with different rules and different timelines for the creation of broadband. A little history here is that on February of 2023, the Capital Projects Fund for Broadband Infrastructure was approved by the Federal Treasury to invest $70.5 million to expand broadband in Wyoming, okay? So we received $70.5 million by federal treasury to expand broadband infrastructure in Wyoming for unserved and underserved areas in the state. I did email you a map of those locations. Those awards were executed in December of '23, and all projects must be completed by December of '26. So similar to what we've been seeing from the other federal types of programs about deployment, appropriation, and actually completion dates. The second federal program for broadband money is known as BEAD. And the Wyoming Broadband Office is in the planning phase for what we are receiving in $348 million in grant funds from the BEAD program through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. So I know that's a little confusing here, but those are the two separate programs. And so this bill is attempting to address the new and different requirements from the two separate broadband programs for which we are receiving monies from. The BEAD program has cascading priorities, which must be met in the following order: unserved communities for broadband, underserved communities for broadband, and 3, community or anchor institutions such as libraries or community centers that lack a 1 gigabyte per second connection. Good news, the federal government sees all of Wyoming as rural, and so they are giving this money in fairly broad blocks. However, in order to really get the funds, we have to develop a detailed plan that demonstrates how at a minimum all the underserved locations in the state will be connected by broadband by the end of the program. The NTIA, which is the BEAD program, will review the plan, and once approved, will begin implementation. What's important to know is that these all have matching funds, of course, as well. The BEAD program, as indicated, is still in that planning phase, and we expect that appropriation of $348 million in federal funding. So what House Bill 71 is actually doing is it's freeing $10 million in the broadband development sub-account, which currently already exists in statute. We know that we have that broadband section in our statute. So it frees up $10 million from that previously appropriated funds in order to generate a 3-to-1 federal match. So, good senators, House Bill 71 turns $10 million of previously appropriated funds for this very purpose into $40 million. That's in addition to any private matching funds that the state may receive and has received from our private partners for this. House Bill 71 also allocates $300,000 from the broadband development subaccount toward administrative fees to the Business Council that is responsible for ensuring the compliance with these federal programs and the deployment of them, in addition to doing the onerous approval of the plans with those federal agencies. So that really is the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's its purpose, to free up current dollars in that funds for this new broadband account, as well as to appropriate some of those dollars for purposes of the administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott. Is there any questions or observations? Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me clarify who's managing those funds. We obviously need more broadband across our state, and particularly in the smaller communities. So is the governor managing that program, or is the Wyoming Business Council managing that program? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Furphy. Any other questions that can be answered? Senator Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this is so frustrating. We're getting all this money from the feds, and then we're going to bury all these lines, and we're going to get them to the houses, and then we're going to say, do you want this? And they're going to go, well, I don't know if I can afford this. So are we paying for them to take it to their house and use it, a monthly fee? Is that fee $100 a month, or what is it? This is so frustrating.
Frustrated Larson. Anyone else? Anyone else? Senator Nethercott, you have an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The state has received $41.5 million in private investment. I think that's important to recognize as part of these matching funds. You know, this is a grant program. The state isn't going in and putting broadband in the rural communities. You have to apply for it in order to be approved. So it would be my suggestion that if you don't want broadband in your community, that you tell your local advocates for that effort that that would be a bad thing for your community, and that high-speed internet is not good for your community. But I don't think there's a requirement there to hook up to broadband or to apply for the funding that may be available to the rest of the state. So important to recognize that it isn't a forced public service, but something that can be applied for through those communities that are unserved or underserved. And to answer the question, the money goes through the governor's office to the business council into the broadband accounts as a result of the way those broadband accounts were originally created about 10 to 12 years ago, I believe, is the history of the creation of those accounts. Could be a little longer. And so that's how that money is funded. But that is the basis for why the business council is asking for $300,000, recognizing the pretty broad scope of work that's required in order to administer the program and the federal grant.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Senator Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. You know, I get leveraging federal dollars 3 to 1 or whatever that ratio was. That's all fine and good. But, you know, the federal government deficit spends at the tune of $2 trillion a year. And to cover that deficit spending, we have to print money and monetize that. So getting hooked on more federal funds is not really the path I think we should be going down with this. Just, you know, that's where all of our inflation are. That's why we're fighting property taxes. Inflation, inflation, inflation. So that's my comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wright. Any other comments, questions, comments? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 71, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. House Bill 71 passes the committee of the whole. And the next bill for your enjoyment is 0. Mr. Floor Leader Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee of the whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign? No. Oh, it almost didn't pass, but it did. Committee of the whole is adjourned. Is that right? No? Oh, rise and report. Okay. Well, it sure works.
Reading clerk will read the committee of the whole report.
Mr. President, your committee of the whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 8, do pass. House Bill 10, do pass. House Bill 16, do pass. House Bill 23, do pass. House Bill 40, do pass. House Bill 73, do pass. House Bill 11, engrossed, do pass. House Bill 14, engrossed, do pass, amended. House Bill 21, engrossed, do pass. House Bill 32, do pass. House Bill 26, do pass. House Bill 27, do pass. House Bill 72, do pass. House Bill 46, do pass. House Bill 71, do pass. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, I move that for the adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion passed. Standing committee reports.
February 26, 2024, Mr. President, Committee Number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom was referred House Bill 34, Solid Waste Municipal Cease and Transfer Funding. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Dockstader, Ellis, Jones, and Rothfuss. Senator Dockstader, Chairman. February 26, 2024, Mr. President, your Committee Number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom was referred to House Bill 35, Limitation on Environmental Rulemaking. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Dockstader, Ellis, Jones, and Rothfuss. Senator Dockstader, Chairman. February 26, 2024, Mr. President, Committee Number 4, Education, to whom was referred House Bill 54, Wyoming Reads Day. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, Scott, and Steinmetz. Senator Scott, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I asked House Bill 34 be re-referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. It does have appropriations.
Objection, so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Pay attention here, Mr. President. I move that we stand adjourned until 9 a.m. Tuesday, February 27th, 9 a.m.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Any announcements? Senator Biden, way to jump up fast. You win.
I'm quick today. Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee Number 3, Revenue, will meet tomorrow upon noon recess in room W6 and online to take up the following 2 House bills. House Bill 9, Fuel Tax Licensee Information Deadline, and House Bill 197, Engrossed Sales Tax Administration Revisions. Thank you, sir.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Committee Number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources will meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, room W2 and online, to take a look at House Bill 67, Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Trust Fund Administration 2.
Senator French.
Yes, Mr. President. Your Committee Number 5, Senate Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in the Capitol Extension Room 6 and online to consider the following bills. House Bill 12, Wyoming Dairy Marketing Act repeal, and House Bill 13, Flow-Through Pools Exemption. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Kinski.
Committee Number 2, Appropriations, will meet at 8 a.m. tomorrow in W113 to consider the following. House Bill 83, Public Retirement, Actuarially Determined Contributions. House Bill 138, State Funds, Pool A, Participation and Fund Limits. House Bill 33, Mining Operations, Blasting Requirements. House Bill 74, Public Health Nursing Budget Requests, as time permits, and other referrals, re-referrals as assigned, and we will pick up at noon if we don't finish them in the morning.
You heard the motion. All in favor? Oh, excuse me, Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, your Committee Number 9, Minerals, will meet 12 noon on Wednesday to hear House Bill 141, State Land, Oil, and Gas Lease Operating Equipment, and House Bill 145, Open Banking Amendments. And a formal notice will be posted. Thank you.
Anything else? You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate stands adjourned until 9 o'clock Tuesday, 2/27/24.